Hello, dear friends, thank you for watching this live updates, and today I'm continuing as this day 7 of Russian aggression against Ukraine continues. My today's video will be a little different from the previous ones. I decided to pack more facts into this video, so it will have first like factual part, and then I will try to offer some reflections on how we feel here in Ukraine, what we think about that, what we do, and what we all should do about this conflict. As you can see, I changed also format of these slides. I used just to speak to the camera. I'm not now putting slides while I'm university lecturer, so it's something that I'm used to use slides, but I don't want to turn it into a lecture, so it will be very concise and brief. But still, I think it's important that you see some of the pictures I'm going to show. Some of them will be representing the scenes of conflict, something you see on TV. It won't be too graphic. Unfortunately, there are much more graphic images of dead bodies and destructions, which I'm not going to show here. You don't need to see that. Your leaders do, and I hope they get those reports from their intelligence services and they provide for them some background for the decisions, tough decisions they have to make. So before I start with the events that unfolded over the past 24 hours or so, I want to correct one misunderstanding. Often in the Western media, you see this map of Russian invasion into Ukraine, and so the territory of Ukraine is marked in yellow, and then the pink parts show the occupied territories, so to speak. This is not completely correct map, because if you see Crimea and in the east Donbas region, those are really occupied areas where there is occupational administration, where Crimea is annexed to Russia altogether, but in the Donbas, those pseudo-republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, they have like occupational administration. So these are like full-fledged occupied territories. But the zones you see in these other places here, over Kyiv and everywhere else, these are not really occupied territories, and they should not be marked in pink color completely, because these areas are not really taken by Russian army. These are the areas through which Russian army marched, advancing usually to Kyiv, or here in the south, advancing to the city of Mariupol. A more correct presentation of the situation would be like this. So Russian forces that invaded Ukraine from Crimea, from the Donetsk and Luhansk so-called republics, or from Russia, they actually penetrated in thin lines that match main highways. And they don't establish any structures as they go on their way. They simply march towards the capital or towards other strategic points. So it's very important to understand, because if you look at the previous map, it can seem that again like 7% of Ukrainian territory has been taken over. It's not yet the case. If they succeed to take over capital, to make our president capitulate and so on, of course they will take hold of those territories, but it has not yet happened, thanks to God. In the last video, I mentioned that what we are seeing today is something like kind of developing of a Syrian scenario, meaning that after the unsuccessful endeavor of the Blitzkrieg, Russian troops started like a long war. Another strategy is implemented, which requires heavy bombing of civilian population of the cities, and destruction of the country's infrastructure and killing of country's population. This is the worst scenario possible, but unfortunately, as events develop today, it looks like this is the one that Putin chose for this conflict. There was another, speaking of maps, there was another interesting story. As of yesterday evening, the dictator of Belarus, Lukashenko, had a meeting with his staff and some journalists, and this meeting was, I think, negligently documented by some journalists, and this map that you can see here was shown. The map has the territory of Ukraine divided into 4 parts, some of which are supposed to be annexed to Russia, and some will be, the fate of others will be decided afterwards. So this is the grand plan of Putin together with Lukashenko. But what is even more interesting here is this arrow going from Ukrainian city of Odessa. So if they succeed to capture Odessa, then they will invade Moldova. The arrow points to the zone that is called Transnistrian Republic. It's another pro-Russian enclave, not recognized internationally, that has been there since early 90s, basically an occupied part of Moldova. So they want to join their forces from Odessa with those in this enclave and invade Moldova. This plan is not yet implemented because they have not been able to capture Odessa, but it shows that the idea with Putin is not to stop with Ukraine, but to go much further. We don't know what will happen after he does that. We already hear some voices from the Baltic countries that they have intelligence that Putin is seriously contemplating invading Baltic countries. So it's kind of developing into full-blown regional war, which is not that far from the World War III. If you look that Baltic countries are parts of NATO. We don't know what he's thinking about Poland, because Poland is, again, very closely integrated into the region, and with any development, military development with Ukraine and Belarus, Poland can be very easily affected. I don't want to panic or to sow panic among you, but this argument is directly relevant for the give us the no-fly zone which Ukraine demands from international community, because we understand that Western politicians don't want that, because this is a risk of the World War II. But if they don't do that, I'm not sure that the risk of the World War III becomes less acute, less strong, because the situation is already developing in a very dangerous direction, and Putin can be stopped only with power, with strong resistance. Let's see now what happened over the past 24 hours. It was not so different from what we have been through in the other 6 days of this war. We go to bed with a lot of stress, because probably our night's sleep will be interrupted by several alarms, depending on in what city you live. But in some cities it's much more intense. Thanks to God, in Lviv here it has been quite quiet since now. But what was different over the past 24 hours is that if in earlier days Russians really tried to target military infrastructure, airfields and other objects, now they are openly and systematically shelling residential quarters. Whereas in the past days, some rockets missed infrastructural objects and hit residential areas, which was already terrible, but now they are clearly targeting the residential areas. So we see shellings of these multi-story buildings in Kyiv, in Kharkiv, in Mariupol, in Kherson. And when, you can can see in this picture, when we wake up in the morning, we witness two things. We witness the consequences of heavy fighting, of Russian columns of soldiers and military vehicles and tanks advancing through our cities, and all the major battles occur in the night because they want during the night to advance closer to Kyiv or to take over Kharkiv or to take over Kherson. And so when people come out of their shelters in the morning, what they see is something like what you see on this picture. And these are really horrific scenes. A lot of Russian tanks and armed vehicles burned down by the hits of our Bayraktars, the drones, or by Ukrainian artillery. Russian casualties are up to 6,000 soldiers as of now. Several hundred surrendered or were taken as captives by Ukrainian troops, but most of them die in those artillery attacks by Ukrainian force. But what Russian army leaders and political leaders do, they still push them into this almost sure death without any remorse, without any pity for those usually 18, 19, 20 years old soldiers. So Ukrainians, as I said, Ukrainians laugh at this conflict in order not to go crazy. And here is a caricature by one of leading Ukrainian caricaturist painters. Happy Death Day to Russian soldiers. There are piles of bodies, really. I'm not going to show these pictures, but if you want, you can see them on the internet, or just believe my word. This is horrible. This is 6,000 bodies in 6 days. But after those shellings, residential quarters look like this. We have a Ukrainian memorial to Ukrainian poet Shevchenko, which symbolically bows his head down to the burned buildings, which was, of course, not the design of the artist. This is the design of life. People lived in those apartments yesterday. Today they don't have apartments anymore. Another thing that is happening in Ukrainian society is that people, especially in southern, eastern regions, they come to protest against the advancement of Russian soldiers. They gather together on the streets, block the streets not to let tanks pass. This is extremely brave, courageous. I'm not sure I would be able to do that because they can be shot at any moment. Usually Russian soldiers are behaving rather, not so violently as they could, not as violently as they behaved in Chechnya, for example, where they just shot civilians from machine guns. It's not yet happening here, thanks God. But we don't know what's going to be next, and there are already some bad signs we will see next. In this picture, you see this huge crowd of people who made barricades and came to stop Russian army from entering one of the largest Ukraine nuclear plants in Zaporizhia region in the south Ukraine, because people are afraid if Russians take over this nuclear plant, they can blow it up, and this would be a nuclear Armageddon, something like we already went through when Chernobyl happened. Also, we have some good initiatives from our Belarusian brothers who, although they are under this Lukashenko's regime, which is not much better than Putin's regime in Russia, the people of Belarus are obviously very sympathetic towards Ukraine. They are not hostile, unlike Russian society, where something like 60% of people seem to be supporting the war. maybe this number is changing now when they get dead bodies back, but a large portion of Russian society is pro-war. Belarusians are not, and what they did yesterday was priceless. They came to the train station to block trains that would bring military personnel and armor and ammunition to Ukraine. It's a courageous thing to do in Belarus, because if you remember, a year ago during the fake presidential elections, civic protests were very brutally repressed, and you can go for 10 years imprisonment in Belarus for doing this. So thank you for our Belarusian friends. In Ukraine, some people who tried to stop Russian tanks with virtually no weapons, this local self-defense units who had very primitive weapons to counter Russian columns of tanks, they were shot by machine guns, and they were buried today in Kherson region. There are various reports, but something like 24 of people killed in action, not soldiers but civilians, civilian self-defense in Kherson itself. And again, those heartbreaking scenes from the cemetery. Many, as I said, many Russian soldiers have been taken by our troops, and now we have this initiative of the Security Service of Ukraine and of some Ukrainian journalists that connect soldiers with their mothers or fathers or whoever, relatives, wives, give them telephone to speak, to testify that they have been taken by Ukrainian forces, that they are in captivity, but the treatment is humane, and what they want to put their mothers to do to put pressure on Russian government to stop the war and to start some peaceful talks. So far, these initiatives have not been very successful, but we hope as more of this develops, there will be more pressure in Russian society and probably some explosion of civil protests that will bring this situation to some results in stopping war. So much for the facts. To finish this video, I just want to offer a brief reflection of how we feel and what we think and what we should do. In the first days of the war, we were obviously shocked, and we acted, I would say, just responsibly. We reacted to what happened in sometimes in rational, sometimes in irrational manner. But now it seems like society has stabilized. People have realized what's going on. There is a lot of horizontal self-organization. Various people offer psychological help to other people, physical help with food, with shelters to the refugees, help to the front lines. I would say people are ever less scared, ever more angry, and the tactical short-time fear is replaced with strategic long-time concern. Where are we heading? What's gonna happen? Of course, it's very difficult to predict what will happen. It's, as I said, it's in the Putin's head, but it's in our hands, and it's what we need today is the support of all international society. Honestly, people were extremely disappointed with Biden's speech yesterday, his address to the nation. He obviously spoke about the war and about Russian aggression, but it seems like he has no effective plan what to do with it. Today there was a very acute confrontation between one Ukrainian journalist and Boris Johnson. She just asked him in a press conference in London, what's his plan? What is he planning to do? It's clear that it's a humanitarian catastrophe in the center of Europe. It's clear that there is no simple solution, but still we should look for some solution. Just banning their banks from SWIFT is not enough any longer. This should have been done probably several years ago. And now we need much stronger action. We need this no-fly zone. It should be introduced somehow. Maybe NATO cannot do it. Maybe we should look for some hybrid solutions. Russians are boasting they are fighting hybrid war in Ukraine, meaning that they use various undercover groups, proxy groups to fight Ukraine, not in the last days, but in these years since 2014. So why should not we use some hybrid tactics and perhaps get help from our Western allies, jets or protection units that would be under Ukrainian flag but would be effectively operated by Ukrainian soldiers helped by their NATO allies. I'm not a politician, I'm not a military expert, I cannot give recipes for this situation, but as you could see from those pictures, the situation is deteriorating very rapidly and it's turning into bloody hell. Something needs to be done here, and I ask you to pray for us, to pressure your representatives, your governments to demonstrate in our support, and if you can also to support Ukraine financially. There are many funds working in the West, trustworthy funds, to which you can transfer some little money for medical supplies or even non-lethal military supplies. This will be greatly appreciated. Also, I cooperate with this volunteering organization, Help to the Frontlines. There are some financial details after my video if you want to help with your donation. I assure you this will be used purposefully in full for the good of the people in Ukraine and for the support of army in Ukraine. Thank you very much.